The next item of business is Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body questions. We have 4 questions today and we have 20 minutes, so I should be able to take a couple of supplementaries. And question number 1 is Bill Kidd.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body what consideration it has given to re-establishing members' ability to via an element of office cost provision to staff cost provision so that they can make their own spending decisions using these allowances.
Liam MacArthur.
I thank Bill Kidd for his question. Parliament agreed to remove the ability to via between the office cost provision and staff cost provision at the end of session 4 when it voted to amend the overall scheme. Further consideration was given to re-establishing viring during the recent Members' Expenses Scheme review. However, SPCB determined that the best way to ensure that all members were supported in a more consistent and sustainable manner was to go to the root of the issue and re-examine the overall staff cost provision. This is currently underway. As such, we do not propose to reintroduce a viring provision in the scheme for next session. However, the point Bill Kidd makes about flexibility within the scheme is something we have considered, and SPCB aims to create more flexibility for members in other ways by creating 2 new provisions, an office property cost provision and an engagement provision, which members can use to flex within set parameters to better suit their costs and ways of working.
Bill Kidd.
Thank you, SPCB, for the reply, and it's very interesting. The rationale behind my question is that, as all MSPs know, there has been an exponential rise in the number of inquiries from constituents and organisations since the advent of COVID-19. Our members of staff are inundated with questions on a very wide range of issues and subjects, and I believe that they are due whatever possible payment our allowances allow for their hard work during these tasks. Thank you.
Liam MacArthur.
Can I thank Bill Kidd for his supplementary? I think he absolutely is right to point out what I think he described as the exponential rise in demand on MSP staff and indeed the Parliament staff generally over the last 5 or 6 months. I think we all owe them an enormous debt of gratitude. I think in terms of the allowances at the present time, there is capacity to allow for overtime, not for bonuses, but for overtime to be paid, albeit within the set budget limits. But I think the point, generally speaking, is that there's a recognition of the increasing demands on parliamentary staff, not just due to COVID, but an expansion of the responsibilities of this Parliament. And it's with that in mind that the SPCB is undertaking its review to ensure that the staff cost provision going into the next session is fit for purpose and meets the needs that Bill Kidd's alluded to.
Question number 2, Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Parliament Corporate Body whether it will pursue establishing an account to allow for the cost of COVID-19 related requirements at local offices to be paid directly by the Parliament.
Sandra White.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I do thank the member for that question. It is an interest to all MSPs and obviously the operation of their constituency offices. May I say to the member that the SPCB has looked to assist members by using their current providers to enable members to order items which they need to reopen their offices. We have also made arrangements with other suppliers who will directly invoice members for any order they place. If members do purchase items through either the Parliament suppliers or direct with another supplier and receive an invoice for it, then the invoice can simply be authorised and emailed to the Allowances Office. The Allowances Office will pay the supplier direct, meaning that the member is not out of pocket and the cost will be met from the incidental and ancillary employment provision as detailed in the COVID-19 advice pages.
Christine Graham.
I thank the corporate body. I think that's the answer I wanted. I'm not sure. I was trying to follow it, but I think the gist of it is that we no longer have, as we had previously, to purchase, pay the bill and then recoup, which was, to me was going round the houses and a waste of everybody's time. Can I just have confirmation? It means now that we simply put in our order and everything else is done by the Parliament.
You will put in your order.
Sandra White.
I thank the member for elaborating on that as well. Basically, I think we need to be very clear on this particular issue, as it is important to members. The answer to that is yes, as long as you have a receipt from the supplier, we will put it into the Parliament under the ancillary employment provision, and it will be paid directly to the supplier, but you must get a receipt first. Does that answer your question?
This is probably not my place, but I'll just say to Ms White, I think she used the word receipt instead of the word invoice. Yeah. Would you like to come back again, Ms? Do you know?
That's why I got
this
all...
could develop, you know, Christine Graham.
It's a double act. No, that's why I was puzzled with the word receipt, because that seemed to me to be exactly in the position I'm trying to get out of.
Sandra White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's never simple when you're dealing with Christine Graham. And my first answer, I did mention invoice, and I apologise for the slip of the tongue by saying receipt. It is invoice. Thank you.
Supplementary, Jamie Green.
Thank you. I'll make it a lot easier, this question. Like many members, we're keen to reopen our regional or constituency offices, and the information being provided by the Parliament has been comprehensive. The offers of assistance from parliamentary staff is very welcome and forthcoming, but I still think the process of understanding what to order, who to order it from and who pays for it is not simple. Could I, for example, it's not just a case of ordering hygienic items or safety items. Some offices may require physical modification, who will undertake that work and who will risk assess those premises. Could I respectfully request that the corporate body ask the Parliament to have a dedicated single point of contact to resource for members who are trying to reopen their offices, who will project manage this and consolidate all of their concerns in one place so that we can get our offices open as quickly as safely as possible.
Sandra White.
Thank you. I thank the member for that, and we have discussed that at the corporate body, and we are looking at new ways to assess the offices. I think there's guidance coming out this week. Parliament will, or next week, sorry, Parliament will be notifying the MSPs in that respect. But I think he makes a very good point, having a one point to contact, basically. But I would say at this point in time, as we said it 3 times, I would say at this point in time, if the member wishes to notify Jackson Carlo as a member representing your party on the corporate body, and Jackson would certainly raise it as well. But there is a point of contact, and you will get updates on the assessment of offices. Thank you.
I think it's called collective responsibility. Question number 3, Neil Findlay.
To ask the Scottish Parliament corporate body whether it has confidence in the hybrid system of voting.
Andy Whiteman.
I thank the member for the question. In short, yes. The corporate body does have confidence in the voting system, and I should clarify, of course, that we don't actually have a hybrid voting system. We have one voting system that has been put in place to enable members to take part in hybrid meetings, so to enable them to take part in meetings at home, remotely, or in the chamber. Now, the voting application, which was developed over the summer, and I'd like to thank staff for their work on that, allows all members who are participating in proceedings, whether they're remotely or in the chamber, to cast their votes accurately and securely from any device with an internet connection and a suitable browser. Now, we are, of course, aware that there have been a variety of issues that have arisen with the system. The presiding officer wrote to members on the 10th of September. There was the 9th of September, there was a written question answered from Daniel Johnson on this matter on the 10th of September. Issues have arisen with the system, with the communications it relies upon, and indeed with members, with users themselves. The system is being constantly tested and refined to ensure that votes continue to be recorded accurately, and I can assure the member that analysis of the log and the voting system, the voting results, confirm that we can have, and members should have, confidence in their accuracy. We do recognise, of course, this is a new system, a new way of working for Parliament. It's a vital way of working for Parliament to enable members to contribute remotely, those who are shielding, for example, and for whom it's impossible to get into the chamber. So the SPCB does recognise, as I said, during the introduction of a new system, several issues have arisen, and the corporate body would like to reassure the member, indeed all members, that Parliament staff are working hard to address the issues that have been identified and make improvements to the system and the procedures involved.
Neil Findlay.
Thanks. I think everyone wants a system that works and that we can all have confidence in. Unfortunately, connection to the current system can, depending on where you are in the country, be unstable. It can be voting is subject to delays. Problems are quite slow to remedy, and results are subject to the PO's interpretation. Parliament staff are doing everything they can to help, but I'm not sure that things are getting an awful lot better. When big decisions made here, sometimes by a single vote, can have such a big impact on people's health, their jobs, their businesses, their life chances and their well-being, then a voting system where there are too many factors that can go wrong does not instil confidence. So what action is being taken to resolve these problems? And finally, can I ask how much has been spent on the system so far?
Andy Whiteman.
I thank the member for that supplementary. We'll get back to the member on the question of costs. I don't have them to hand. But, you know, any system that's developed that is designed to be able to be used remotely will rely on communications. And the communications for a member in Aberdeenshire, Dumfries and Galloway, their own home, their constituency office, they all do vary. And it's important to recall the advice and guidance that was given to members in relation to using the voting system. It's now been well established if any member is not confident that the vote has been recorded, they can either raise that if they're taking part in proceedings via the Blue Jeans platform, or they can raise a point of order in the chamber. Now, I understand this takes time, absolutely, and there's still a delay for testing, but the point of that is to ensure that every member who is participating in proceedings is able to cast their vote. So we would just ask for continuing patience for members. On the question of the PO's interpretation, of course, we're not responsible for the presiding officer's interpretation of results, but the presiding officer has ultimate discretion and authority to make decisions as to the votes in this chamber. And if there's any assurance to the member, we have a detailed log of every member who's logged onto the Blue Jeans platform, when they did, when they logged off, onto the voting system, off, the votes that have been recorded, whether they've been changed, etc. So if there's any doubt, if the presiding officer has any doubt as to the validity of a vote, and that would include votes that are tight, the presiding officer will, in the normal course of events, seek to first to delay declaring the result, as he did last week, in order to satisfy himself from an analysis of the voting system and the logs that all votes were recorded correctly. So I can say little more than to assure Neil Findlay that the system is under constant review. Any member who has ideas or feedback, they've been encouraged to do so since the beginning. Please do feed that in. But I would just stress that we do need a system of voting to enable parliamentary business to continue. And we are doing all we can to make sure that the voting system continues to command confidence. Thank you.
I do have a lot of supplementary requests for this, and we have had quite a comprehensive answer from Mr Whiteman. So I wish to take all the supplementaries because it's an important issue. But if we could be aware of the time, please. Another quick question from Mr Findlay.
Officer, the system at the moment, in Parliament, if we miss a vote for any reason, speaking to our pals at the toilet, whatever, daydreaming, then it's not recorded. Rightly, it's not recorded. At the moment, that can happen, and someone just needs to say, point of order, Presiding Officer, my vote was not recorded. Is that correct?
As I understand it, if a member is daydreaming in the toilet, delayed by a train under the previous system, their vote is not recorded. And there's no means by which they can have that vote recorded because they're not present in proceedings, as I understand the standing orders. If you're present in proceedings, that's to say you're on the Blue Jeans platform or you're in the chamber and you have any doubt as to whether your vote was recorded in the way that you intended it, you should raise a point of order from the chair. If you've missed the vote, I heard, if you've missed the vote, you've missed the vote.
Right, supplementaries. I have Murdo Fraser, who will be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to raise the extreme length of time it is taking to vote. Last week it took us, I think, 40 minutes to get through 4 votes. Now, we're all busy people. We've all got other more important things to do than to be sitting in here waiting for the voting system to work. It's supposed to be a family-friendly Parliament. There are many members who have childcare commitments in the evening and suddenly find an extra half hour added to the day wreaks havoc with that. So if we can't get the system working more quickly, can we please ditch it for one that does?
Well,
Andy White.
I understand the member's question about delay, and that's a significant issue for some members I know who have caring responsibilities who are planning to get away from Parliament. And in the first instance, that's probably an issue to be raised at Bureau in terms of timetabling, because we do need to allow a period of time to ensure that all members who are present in proceedings are capable of voting. And I'm sure if the member himself was sitting remotely and I was having any connection problems, he would wish, particularly in a tight vote, particularly on business that he's on an amendment he's pressing himself, perhaps, he would wish that time to be allocated. And that's what the presiding officer is doing. And I know it's frustrating, particularly at the end of a busy and long day, but these are some of the compromises we have to make in ensuring that we have a Parliament that can continue to function when many members are not able to be present.
Stuart Stevenson, followed by Miles Briggs.
Can I congratulate the SPCB on what is really an excellent technical solution that supports my health and that of older people who would wish to be remote from Parliament if we can. However, can I ask, in the light of the difficulties that seem to be mostly human-based rather than technology, whether the SPCB will look at standardising the technology platforms we use more generally. Sometimes we're using Microsoft Teams, which not everyone's comfortable with multiple platforms, and I think there are opportunities for simplification of the interface. Will that be looked at?
Andy White.
I thank the member for his question. I don't know what evidence he's got that most of the problems have been human. Certainly a lot of problems are down to user continuing unfamiliarity and user error, but there have been issues to do with communications. We have a log of all the problems that have been. We know exactly what all the problems have been. Now, the member makes a point about harmonising on one platform. One of the reasons for developing this app and its specification at the moment is it is secure. And that's important in terms of a legislative voting, but it is also able to be deployed across a range of platforms because members themselves use a range of platforms. So that is to accommodate the needs and wishes of members. And I think it would be inappropriate and perhaps adding far greater complexity if we were to insist on standardising platforms that members have been using perhaps for years.
Miles Briggs, followed by James Kelly.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. In the letter which Mr Whiteman referred to from the Presiding Officer on the 9th of September, there was a specific point of reference asking that external partners would be asked to validate and make any improvements needed to the app. Can I ask the Scottish Parliament's corporate body if any specialist independent person has been now appointed to undertake that work?
Andy Whiteman.
I thank Miles Briggs for that question. I have to say I do not know it's an operational detail, but we will ensure that corporate body gets back to the member and lets him know.
And James Kelly.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I think everyone appreciates the hard work that staff are putting in to try and ensure the integrity of this voting system, but there's no doubt that it is causing some anxiety. Can I follow up on this point of when somebody's vote's not been recorded, they raise a point of order, and the presiding officer then deems that he can add that vote on accordingly? Can I ask if that is consistent with the Parliament's standing orders for the recording of votes?
Andy Whiteman.
I thank Mr Kelly for that question. I mean, questions of an interpretation of standing orders are not really for us in the corporate body to address. Other than the fact that the presiding officer, I think, has quite substantial discretion in making sure that he is comfortable with the votes and that they've been recorded. And I've no doubt that the presiding officer is applying the standing orders correctly, but I'm not in a position to interpret the standing orders, I'm afraid.
I can say to Mr Kelly, I will ensure that the presiding officer's office sends out an answer to that question. And we move now to question number 4, James Kelly.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Parliament corporate body when it will set out a terms of reference and timeline for its review into the staff cost provision.
Liam MacArthur.
I announced to the Chamber at the last SPCB question time in March that there would be a review of the staff cost provision at this session. Following this, the Presiding Officer wrote to business managers on the 13th of May 2020, and a memo was issued by SPCB members to their parliamentary group members on 14th of May. This included the report and recommendations arising from the review of the reimbursement of members' expenses scheme, as well as the agreed terms of reference for the review of the staff cost provision as commissioned by the SPCB. The remit for the staff cost provision review, along with the wider review of members' expenses scheme report, are also available on the SPCB pages of the Scottish Parliament website. The review is ongoing at present, and the SPCB expect to consider its findings later in the autumn. Following SPCB consideration, if any changes are recommended to the staff cost provision, this will be subject of a resolution of Parliament, and we would expect this to take place towards the end of the current session in order to introduce any changes from the beginning of the next session in May 2021.
James Kelly.
I thank Liam MacArthur for that answer. I think, as has been highlighted earlier in the session, there's no doubt been a substantial growth in the number of queries and the complexity of those queries during COVID-19 that MSP's offices have received. And I want to pay tribute to the staff across all parties for the work that they do in serving constituents. However, what I think it does is it highlights the need for capable, experienced staff who are able to assist MSPs with these queries, and also in supporting staff in scrutinising legislation and government activity in the Parliament. Therefore, it's essential that the staff cost provision is carried out timeously and comes to an appropriate conclusion. I think there's got to be appropriate transparency around that. The GMP Trades Union have raised with me a lack of consultation with trade unions and those in the workplace. So can I ask, what is the process for setting out a clear plan, not only engaging with MSPs, but also engaging with staff representatives and trade unions?
Liam MacArthur.
Well, can I start by thanking James Kelly? I think on the back of the point that Bill Kidd was making, I think he absolutely rightly points to not just the substantial increase there's been, but the increase in the complexity of the issues that staff are having to deal with. That's something very much that's informing the review process at the moment, which is looking not just at the scale or the level of the provision, but actually in the way the job descriptions and the job roles are defined to provide the flexibility that members quite clearly need, but reflecting the changing nature of the roles themselves. Can I also thank James Kelly for his involvement in that review process. A number of MSPs have committed to be interviewed as part of this review process. I would encourage Bill Kidd and anybody else with an interest to make that known to SPICE so that they can involve them in that process. To date, on the back of a survey of MSP staff, there are also interviews taking place with individual MSP staff members as well. I think the involvement of the trade unions has been an issue that's been raised before. I mean, ultimately, MSPs are the employers, and therefore this is a review that needs to take into consideration the views of MSPs, the views of MSP staff members, and I'm sure that some of the concerns that the GMB have made, they've written to the SPCB, will be reflected through that interview and survey process. But we cannot lose sight of the fact that the ultimate responsibility will fall to MSPs. But we must ensure that the staff cost provision provides them with the wherewithal to employ the staff they need to do to perform the roles they need to do on behalf of their constituents.
That concludes SPCB questions. I'll have a very short suspension so that some of the desks can be cleaned.